Hey, good morning, class. It's Mr. Stewart, and this is the integrity lesson for week 8, which will cover chapters 11 and 12. Chapter 11 is property crime, and chapter 12 is what we call enterprise crime. Formerly, it's been called white-collar crime. So we're going to talk just a little bit about those things this morning. You know, and after we've got out of the theories, I think that this class is much more straightforward because, you know, the theories can get a bit lengthy. They can get a bit overbearing sometimes. There's a lot of them, so you get a little confused on the theories. But when you really start getting into the crimes, it's much more straightforward. And so the first thing I want to talk about in Chapter 11 is property crime. And property crime is exactly that. It's crime involving property. Whether it be the taking of or the destruction of property, and typically not your own property. So just understand that it's not really about hurting anybody. It's not really about injuring someone. It's not about bodily harm. It's simply about, I want what you have, and I'm going to figure out a way to do it. Now, from a criminological perspective, it's important for us to consider the motivations behind property crime. But before we consider the motivations behind property crime, we need to kind of understand what some of the property crimes are. One of the biggest and most common property crimes is simply theft, also called larceny. Larceny is kind of the older common law term, but theft is simply the taking of something that's not yours with the intent to typically permanently deprive that person of that object or whatever it is that you're stealing. And you can have professional thieves who are doing it simply for economic reasons. That's their motivation. And you have occasional thieves who do it maybe for the thrill. Maybe they also do it for immediate economic or financial gratification. Or maybe it's because they just want whatever it is that you have. I mean, we see young kids steal sometimes, fairly often. I mean, even a piece of candy. You want a piece of candy in the grocery store and you get told no, and the kid thinks, well, it's out there and they won't miss this one piece, so I'll take that single piece of candy. It's important for society to teach people that is not correct, nor is it legal behavior, because, I mean, think about this. Knowing what you know about motivations and criminological theory at this point, if a behavior is allowed, it will probably continue. And it will become part of the learning process. Hey, you know, maybe it started with stealing a piece of candy and it graduated up to now this person's a car thief or, you know, a cat burglar or whatever. But theft is probably the major property crime that's out there. When you just take something that's not yours. The occasional thief doesn't really define themselves as a thief. They don't call themselves a thief. They don't necessarily even take pride in the fact that they may or may not be good at stealing. However, the professional criminal makes a significant portion of their income from theft, receiving or selling stolen property, or involved in the theft in some which way, shape, form, or fashion. But they typically will define themselves that way. That becomes their identity. And I think that's important from a criminological perspective, is whether or not the person has actually took on or developed the identity as that type of criminal, whatever type of criminal that we're talking about. If they have, they're more of a professional criminal. If they have not, then they're more of an occasional one. Going along with theft, another popular property crime is, of course, shoplifting. We see that many retail outlets, stores, Walmart, Target, whatnot, you know, they have things and people out there to combat shoplifting. Because, I mean, it results in something we call inventory shrinkage. When they can't account for something, they knew it was on the shelf, it was part of the inventory, it was not purchased So that means it had to be stolen. Somebody walked off with it. You're not going to prevent every single act of shoplifting. You also look at the motivations behind that too. In the fact that from a criminological perspective, some people do it because they need to. I have caught people shoplifting food from the grocery store because they didn't have money to buy anything and they were hungry. That's a different situation than somebody who's shoplifting a CD or an iPod, either because hey, they wanted it, or maybe they just didn't wait. They just couldn't wait. We might even look at strain theory working in that particular instance, where somebody wanted something like somebody else had. They didn't have the means to get there legitimately, so they went through illegitimate or illegal means to obtain the item. It also may be a psychological motivation. Some people are kleptomaniacs. Some people steal because it's in their nature. They get a gratification or a high, if you will, from taking stuff that's not theirs. Those people do exist. They are out there. Couple different types of theft in regard to shoplifting or larceny, in the fact that you can have petty larceny, which is stealing small, less valuable items, and you can have grand larceny, which is stealing large and more high dollar items. Typically, most states divide those up into misdemeanors and felonies. If you're stealing something small, and depending upon the state, if it's less than $500, worth $500, or less than worth $1,000, then it's probably a misdemeanor. If it's worth more than $500 to $1,000, then it is probably a felony. It just depends on the state. Where I was a police officer in Tennessee, anything that was $500 or more in value was a felony if you stole it. Anything that was under $500, $499.99, was a misdemeanor. And of course, that can make a big difference in the sentence that you got, and whether or not you're a convicted felon or not, which is also pretty important as well. All right, moving right along, and make sure you read these two chapters and look at the highlighted, the bold terms, and you understand the difference between the types of theft and the types of property crime. Make sure that you're thinking about the motivations behind it. We also see other types of theft, such as credit card theft. People steal people's credit cards and use them, which may also fall in line with kind of identity theft to a certain degree. Auto theft. We see a lot of cars stolen in the United States. I mean, cars are popular. People want cars, and if you can get one at a rock bottom price, then you will. Or a lot of people steal cars and then they will strip them out and sell the parts for a lot of money. So it's a moderate risk. However, it's a pretty good payday for those people. Typically, what we see, those major thefts are done by more professional criminals, what we would consider career criminals, who define themselves as a car thief, or define themselves as a burglar, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, or they define themselves, as an identity thief, because that's how they're getting the majority of their income, is through that illegal activity. Whereas your occasional thief, almost a crime of opportunity. Something presents itself, they'll take it. If it doesn't, they don't go out of their way to steal it. I've dealt with both, and believe me, their motivations are quite differently. Fraud, bad checks are also considered property crimes. If you purposefully write a check that you know that there's not enough money in the account to cover that check, in most states that's a felony. And most people don't realize that that's a very serious offense, especially if you write a check on a closed account. So let's say you have a checkbook from an account you had 2 years ago, and you still have checks in it, and you need something, and so you just go to the store and you write somebody a check on that account that's been closed. Maybe you don't even have an account with that bank anymore. Maybe you've moved or whatnot. They will definitely come after you for that one, because that shows the intent. Whereas everybody's not the best bookkeeper. I've done it. put it this way. My wife has done it. I've never intentionally written a bad check. My wife has written a couple simply because she didn't keep up with the balance the way she should have, and most of the time, because it happens fairly frequently, what typically happens is the bank, like my bank, will cover it. If I have an overdraft, my bank will cover it, and then whenever my next deposit comes in, they take their fees out of that, and that's how they make their money. If I did not have direct deposit, they probably wouldn't cover it either. But if your bank doesn't cover it, then a lot of times the store will get that you wrote the bad check to will call you and say, hey, you wrote us a bad check. Can you come and pick this check up and pay us what you owe us along with a fee? Like many people charge $20, $25, $30 extra if you write them a bad check. And of course, if you don't do that, if you don't cover it, then they can take it to the district attorney, and they can definitely prosecute you for that. I sold a boat to a guy out in Colorado last November actually, and the guy paid cash to the guy who was about had the boat parked in his yard, and then the guy who got the cash sent me a check for the amount of the boat. Well, I cashed the check, and I used that money for something, and then I got notified by my bank that the check bounced. So I have been trying to collect this bad check for almost a year, and I finally got in touch with the guy a couple weeks ago, and I said, look, if you can't make this right, I said I'm going to be forced to take it to the district attorney and have you prosecuted for writing me a bad check. And interestingly enough, he had when it first bounced, he said, hey, sorry, bookkeeping error on my part. He wrote me another check, sent it to me, I deposited it, it bounced. So, at this point, I'm gonna give him every opportunity that I can, but after that, I'm gonna have the district attorney take him to court and prosecute him for writing me a bad check. If he doesn't pay me, I even offered 2 weeks ago. I said, hey, if you got stuff that's worth that amount of money, I'll take that, just so you don't have to go through this. You got tools or whatever. He's a locksmith out in Colorado. In fact, I used to do some work with him because I did locksmith work too. And I said, hey, I'll take some locksmith tools, whatever. I'm willing to work with you. And he's like, well, I already sold this and sold that, so I guess either he's going to come up with the cash or he's going to go to jail, I suppose. So that's just kind of the things that you see with bad checks. A lot of times they are unintentional, but even in an unintentional one, if you don't make it right, you're still apt to be prosecuted. Fraud. Let's talk about fraud for just a minute. Fraud is when you purport yourself to be somebody you're not in order to you to receive some sort of gain from it. It's really misrepresentation of a fact that causes a person to willingly give you their property, basically. So, if you said, hey, I'm an insurance salesman, and you come to your house and I show you some paperwork, and you bought an insurance policy and you paid me for it, and then you never got the policies in the mail because I was a fraud, then that's a good example of what fraud is. And this happens all the time, especially with like driveway sealers and roofers or barn painters and things. They'll come along and say, hey, can we do this, can do that, can you pay us up front so we can get the material, and then we'll be happy to come back and do it, and then they never show up. So that's basically using false pretenses to get you to give them some property. That is considered a property crime until you fraudulently take over somebody's identity, and then it's considered identity theft. It's also you need to also understand that if you come into possession of stolen property, that's also a crime. If you purposefully receive stolen property, that's a crime. If you sell stolen property, that's a crime. And a lot of times people do this and they don't even know it's stolen. Maybe they traded around for this and that, and then all of a sudden the police are coming by and say, hey, this is stolen, and then they take it, and then you're out the money. So that you paid, or the value of the property that you traded around for it. The people who are actually the criminals are the ones who are walking away with that sweet deal, because they're not the ones that got caught. Now, most of the time we don't do a lot of prosecution for this unintentional possession of stolen property. Although we can, we don't. We usually try to track it down back to the person who intentionally had it and knew it was stolen. Embezzlement's also another type of property crime. When you're stealing from your employer, you're skimming money out of your employer's account somehow or another. If you're a convenience store clerk or a bank teller, you can see that this happens sometimes, where maybe somebody gives you $8 and you put $6 in the register and put $2 in your pocket. That would be embezzlement. Embezzlement's simply a fancy word for stealing. You're stealing from your employer. Burglary is a big one in regard to property crimes. Burglary is the entering of a home with the intent to commit a crime therein. Typically, the crime you're going to commit is theft. If you enter a home with the intent to burn it down, it's still a burglary. It might even be arson if you do set it on fire. But if you simply entering the home, the residence, or the business is burglary. You can have other crimes in addition to that. So if you enter the home and you take something from the home, it's burglary and theft. If you just enter the home but you don't leave with anything, you can still be charged and it's considered burglary. So I want you to understand there's a difference between burglary and robbery. Robbery means that typically somebody is home and you're using force or the threat of force to exert your crime, to enact the crime. Whereas burglary is where typically nobody is there. You're doing it maybe under the color of night, or when the business is closed, or when nobody's at home. Now, you may use force to get into the house, such as breaking a door or a window, but we're not talking about force as in forcing someone to open the door. That's not burglary. That would be robbery. Hopefully that makes sense to you. There are burglars who do this for a living. That's what they do. That's all they do is go around and break into people's stuff and steal from them. That's how they get their income. So just understand you will run into that on occasion. And then arson is listed in your textbook as a property crime. However, many states are now actually considering arson as a violent crime because the potential for injury and death is there. Arson is simply defined as the willful and malicious burning of a home, a building, a vehicle, or even now, like something in the environment, like a forest fire, a wildfire, a grass fire, something like that. That's also considered arson if you set that fire with the understanding that you know what's likely to happen. And the reason that we're considering that now in many states a violent crime is because we know that in wildfires people die. People's homes are destroyed. People's lives are put in danger even if nobody does die. So the potential is definitely there for death or injury to happen. So make sure you read over that section in the textbook on arson. You're in chapter 11. It does talk about arson being a property crime, and I understand that because that's kind of just understand that whenever you set somebody's stuff on fire and you burn it down, you're destroying it. So it is about the property, but we've kind of begun to look at arson more from its motivation and its result. And sometimes the motivation is to hurt somebody. Sometimes the result is death. So just think about that. All right, we're going to switch gears here just a minute and move on into Chapter 12. I'm going to talk about Chapter 12 here for just a couple minutes. Enterprise crime, which is considered white-collar crime, cyber crime, organized crime. Make sure you read this chapter very carefully. We're seeing a lot of these types of crimes today. Typically, white-collar crime in the past, we kind of thought was just like embezzlement, where somebody was stealing from their employer, or whether maybe they were stealing property from their employer, maybe they were just stealing secrets or something like that. It's kind of been expanded at this point, especially with the advent of the internet and internet crime, to include cyber crime, and we also include organized crime into what we call enterprise crime now as well, where you have a particular entity or group of people who are engaging in a whole lot of different crimes for a whole lot of different motivations, most of which is financial. So make sure that you read over this chapter in regard to white collar crime. If you have any questions, issues, or concerns in regard to this material, please reach out. Again, look at the highlighted items, the bold items. It talks about fraud. It talks about embezzlement, again, in regard to enterprise crime. It talks about corporate crime. If you think about it, Google the Enron, E-N-R-O-N scandal. Enron, E-N-R-O-N. That's a good example of corporate crime. Price fixing among gas companies. We've seen that happen, especially right after 9/11. Where gas companies saw that as a good way to make a whole lot of extra money real quick, so they gouged us on the price of gas right after 9/11 happened, and there really was no reason for it yet at that time, because we were not in a war at that time. Environmental crime may also fall into this category. There is some theories of white-collar crime in this chapter. Make sure you read over those, such as the rationalization view, where people are reasoning out that they should commit this crime because maybe the company isn't being fair to them and they feel like they're owed something. Look at how we control white-collar crime. Make sure you read over the cyber crime section, which is very popular at this point. There's been several cases you may remember in Florida where cyberbullying caused a 12-year-old girl to jump off of top of a concrete plant and commit suicide, and then they ended up charging the two girls who were bullying her, although they didn't immediately cause her death. I have some issues with that, but it's kind of what's going on with that right now. Computer fraud, pornography, prostitution, any kind of computer crime that's out there would also fall into this category. And in many cases, the motivation from a criminological perspective for this type of crime is purely financial. It's done sometimes to get back at somebody, but it's typically all about just as an income producer for the most part. So make sure you read about cyber stalking, cyber bullying, identity theft, organized crime. That's typically like your mafia, your gang activity, where you have a group of people acting as an entity who are engaging in lots of different types of crimes. You can read over that. It's pretty straightforward as well. Make sure you are familiar with the RICO Act, which is considered the Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organization Act. That's how we typically prosecute a lot of organized crime syndicates. And quite a bit of material in these two chapters, but however, it is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of terminology, not much theory at this point, but simply a lot of definitional parts to the material that you just have to know what something is. and how it relates to something. So kind of concepts and definitions, but no real theories, say for those couple that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Again, if you have questions, problems, concerns, reach out, and I'll see you again next week. And we are on the downhill slide at this point. Bye-bye, guys.